Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you may be listening from. This is another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. I'm your host, Michael Cross, and I hope that you will find today's message to be one that will inspire you to think and to question the dominant paradigms that exist in today's society. You know, one of the things I like to really push is the idea that Benjamin Franklin had it right when he said that we should always question authority, and that was a duty of a patriot to do. Anyway, before I get started, just want to remind people that you can catch past episodes, whether they be discussions or interviews with guests, by going to my YouTube station at Michael Cross. If you type it in and into the search, it's the one that comes up with Freedom from Conscience, my book series. And also check out my articles at my website, michaelcross.net. Okay, enough of the plugs there. What I would like to do tonight is deal with a subject I've been wanting to deal with for quite some time. In fact, about a year and a half ago, I did a show on, in general, the hidden messages. In fact, I think that's the title of the show on YouTube, the hidden messages in zombie movies. Now, before people are going, oh, no, I don't want to hear anything about zombies. I don't think they've quite gone the way of vampires with Twilight, even though there's lots and lots of zombie movies out there and series now. The thing is that I think there's something a little bit more profound in these stories, and particularly in the AMC series, The Walking Dead. Now, I was going to do a show on this, and the thing is, I ran across an article in, of all places, National Review. And there's an article there. Let me get you the contact information on that. Yes, in the National Review, it was published on December 5th, 2015, last month. And the title is The Walking Dead's Political Philosophy. And the thing is, I think a lot of people miss this, because I had someone last month who I said I was going to do a show on this. This is actually the day I ran across the article. And they were saying, oh, come on, Walking Dead, I hate that show. I don't watch it, and blah, blah, blah. And then I quoted some stuff from this article, saying that actually the TV series is a little bit more profound than what he might expect. And afterwards, he's like, okay, well, maybe that actually should be something to consider. Let's see here. Yeah. The thing is that you have to look at the actual premise of the story to actually understand its underlying political philosophy. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that maybe a lot of people don't really connect to at first, and I wouldn't have if I hadn't actually stumbled across this series. I had avoided it at all costs because I thought, it's just like any of these other zombie shows, except it's a series, right? A little special effects and, basically a soap opera. And it's not. It's not. The thing is, though, one of the interesting premises behind these kinds of shows is the idea of what happens when you get rid of people's crutches. And I don't mean that in a sense of someone being handicapped. I mean, what happens when you get rid of humanity's crutches when it comes to the idea that you wake up someday and there are no police, no military, and no economic infrastructure, no media that connects you, whether that be, corporate media, which we know we can't really trust, or alternative or independent media. And, essentially it's everyone, surviving on their own. And that's an interesting concept because essentially most people have never actually considered that. We have assumptions that even if we go to another country and something goes wrong, that there's always someone there that will save us. There's always a policeman. There's going to always be a hospital. There's going to always be these other things. And, you know, even if you're way out in the wilderness and you get injured, well, you still have the idea, you know, especially now with cell phones, you get on your cell phone and call someone for help. There's always someone that's going to come and assist you. And you see, the thing is, what if that didn't exist? What if you had some sort of meltdown? Now, it could be a meltdown like in the History Channel's documentary, which I've dealt with after Armageddon. You know, something like a disease outbreak similar to the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, in which maybe the majority of people survive. It's just that the infrastructure is so weakened since, you know, it's a very fragile system. I mean, it's huge, but at the same time, it's fragile. If that infrastructure crashed because of economics, of disease, it could crash because of an economic crash. You know, you could have a whirlwind effect. And I'll deal with, just a moment here, I'll deal with an interview I did with Professor Joseph Tainter, who mentioned the idea of what would happen if you had a nuclear blast above North America that was, let off just at the right point in space and would knock out our electrical grid. I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen, you know, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing about asteroids or anything like that. We don't need them. You could have something that could even be something like a massive solar storm, you know, that we believe has happened in the past. But anyway, let's just say you wake up and things have gone away. You can't turn your TV on. Your cell phone doesn't work. You certainly, you know, you've seen those pictures of like the whole Black Friday thing where people are, you know, stomping on each other in order to get, I don't know, a cheap deal on a microwave oven or something like that. But the thing is, think about what happens if your infrastructure totally collapses. Again, there was a zombie film. Oh, what was that? World War Z, the scene in the store in which Brad Pitt's trying to find some asthma medicine for his daughter or something like that. And people are just raiding the place, including cops, you know, just trying to get as much of the stuff as possible because the infrastructure has collapsed. Well, you don't need a zombie epidemic for that. Okay. Yeah. But let's just go into this premise of what it would be like, in a situation in which all your assumptions are gone. And what I'm going to start off with is a little bit of insights from that interview I did a while back, the one about what happens when society collapses. You can find that at my site. Let me just get you the exact title here, just in case you can't find it. And that is What Happens When Society Collapses. Yes, What Happens When Society Collapses. It's a 31-minute interview with Joseph Tainter. And the thing is that he pointed out something quite interesting. I think we can figure this out. And I kind of wrote about this in my third book, Freedom from Conscience, Deliverance from Evil. And the thing is that in that book, there was a kind of a serial killer who was kind of a Charles Manson type. You know, he was waiting for the civilization to end. And he goes through kind of these same kinds of things, describing this to the protagonist, what he expects to happen. And essentially it's true. The cities would become predatory. You would have gangs that would be trying to grab up resources. The countryside, on the other hand, people would pull together. you would have you would have groups of people that would be unified according to family, their church. It could just be the community small enough that everyone just kind of bands together. I remember talking to someone one time, and he lived in I don't know if he still lives there, but he lived in Eastern Oregon. And I asked what would happen in the event of some sort of huge, like a big nuclear war or something like that. And he said, well, there'd be plenty of people in Eastern Oregon that would blow up the passes that lead into the desert section, the high desert section of Oregon. Because almost everyone lives in Western Oregon, but there's only passes, there's some narrow passes that go into those regions. So the thing is that if those were broken, then you could isolate Eastern Oregon and therefore not have to worry about thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees from your own state coming and taking your resources. But see, that's what would happen in the cities. You would have powerful groups that would band together, probably due to the fact they had weapons, and they would take what they wanted, and then they would start moving outward. And it would be that, there might be a buffer zone, the suburbs, and depending on how well armed and how unified peoples could be, they would have to take these people on. And then the countryside, though, would be free from that for a large degree. And he stated, Joseph Tater stated in his interview that there was a congressional study in 2008 that showed that if you did that thing with the pulse, the electromagnetic pulse, and it knocked out the electrical grid of the United States, that you would have, within a year, 2/3 or 200 million people would be dead. And of course, he thought that would be actually just take a couple months, really, for that to happen. But most Americans would die. You would not have the food being produced. It would be dangerous to go out and farm your lamb. You would have to keep your animals under close guard for fear that people would come and raid and kill your livestock and take it for themselves. It essentially would be a Hobbesian nightmare. And this is kind of the society that is presented in the Walking Dead series. Now, the article that I was telling you about from National Review brought up a very good point, and that is, and this is a quote from the article, think about how each episode is put together from a producer and showrunner's point of view. The plot construct they've come up with forces them to think through, episode after episode, the very questions that have concerned political philosophers for centuries. The show is valuable because it allows you to apply the principles of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill to a sort of game theory decision tree in a real-world simulation. And the thing is that while we don't have zombies out there, and unless in the future they create some sort of weird nanotech that would get out and create zombies, right now we're not too worried about zombies. But again, in the series, it's not zombies you're really having to worry about. They're kind of a nuisance that if you have your back turned too long, they're going to chomp your neck and kill you. The real nuisance is, the real danger, I should say, is other survivors. Because they're all in groups and they're fighting each other. Now, lone survivors get picked off real fast. And that would happen in the real world as well. If you think you're one of those guys that's just going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be rugged like, the days of Davy Crockett or something like that, and go off in the hills and survive on your own, the thing is that you are probably not going to survive. First of all, you don't have the skills, probably, that Davy Crockett had, or Daniel Boone. And I would encourage younger people who go to public school in the United States to look those two individuals up. They're quite interesting individuals. You've probably not heard of them in your history classes. But the thing is that most people don't have those kind of survival skills. They don't have those kind of skills that would enable you to survive just as yourself, even. The thing is, in those days, 200, 300, 400 years ago, people were kind of, they didn't perceive discomfort in the same way that we do. I saw a documentary about the Revolutionary War talking about George Washington at Valley Forge. And many of his soldiers didn't even have shoes during, and it was snowing. And the thing is that they still persevered and survived. Nowadays, if you're missing your mittens or something, you probably would think that you would die within a couple hours in a snowstorm. And the thing is that people were just hardier then, and they were used to it. They adapted to it. Okay? You adapt to your environment. You take, I think it'd be really interesting. Instead of this show that they have, the, Naked and Afraid on Discovery, where it seems that they take two people who are, at least I've seen a couple episodes, and it seemed that they take people that can get by on their own if stuck in the jungle somewhere naked, a man and woman. And even then, of course, you've got the security of people being there in case they have to extract you for illness or injury or something like that. But I think that these people are actually, they have some sort of ability to survive. If you took the average socialite, that's used to, Beverly Hills or Rodeo Drive or something like that, and stuck them out there in the middle of the woods for a month. Actually, I think the ratings would be very high, and you don't take people that are skilled. You take people that are not skilled and put them out there and see, them be through misery for a month. And that would be in warm climates, much less cold. But anyway, the thing is, I think his idea that 2/3 of the population would die in a few months is probably pretty correct. Now, what does that lead us to? Well, I think that the people that made the series, The Walking Dead, are very, very intelligent when it comes to the way they have presented these kinds of, in some ways, archetypes in the series, and how those illustrate what would happen in a real societal collapse. Now, the one thing I think is the most interesting thing is, and this is one reason why many of these TV series, or not TV series, but movies dealing with zombies, they actually have made sociology classes dealing with zombie film and series for universities. And I think that's actually a really good idea, because ultimately what these series are valuable about in that respect is they are a study on sociology and psychology of how people suddenly lose all of the artificial constructs of society, and suddenly they're just themselves. You see, the thing is that with The Walking Dead, you have like some of the main characters. I would focus on someone like Daryl Dixon. He's kind of the symbolic redneck, the maybe even on the border, of that whole, I hate that term, but what people call white trash and so forth. On the periphery, the kind of person you expect in a trailer court or in a really rundown section of a rural community. And the thing is that even though he is from this kind of background, his character, his skills at surviving become necessary for all the other people to survive. And so therefore there's an equality forced upon these people. You have a situation where the main character, Rick Grimes, he's supposed to have been a policeman, and he winds up having to lead his family and a few other people and trying to get them to survive in this very hostile climate. And his transformation is quite interesting, which I'll deal with in a few minutes. But I think if you compare season 1 to season 5, for instance, there's a huge transformation. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, in the sense of, presenting how people would have to survive under these circumstances. And there are a few other characters here that we can deal with, but there's also communities that seem to represent something deeper than just being a plot, just a plot scenario to throw in just to keep people interested and offer some variety. And that would be the Woodbury community that you run into. I think it was season 3, and then also Alexandra, which season 5. I'm not going to really deal with Terminus because, well, we don't really see the social dynamics of the cannibal community. Although, with the whole spider and fly thing, it's somewhat reminiscent of, or like, what is it, Hansel and Gretel? Come on in, and then you wind up being on the dinner table, or at least the planned dinner table. But anyway, I just want to deal with a few aspects of the film, and I'm going to deal with 3 characters and how they sort of fit into this whole scheme. Now, the first one I want to kind of deal with in conjunction with another character is the relationship between Andrea. Didn't she last? No spoiler alerts there. Never mind. And also the governor. The thing is, the plot comes around them finding this community that's run by this guy who's kind of known as the governor. He is, at first it seemed, he's presented as a nice guy with a firm grip over a community of like 100 people or so. A little bit, well, not a little bit, he's a lot narcissistic and so forth. And, he's used his skills, his charisma and kind of political savvy to be able to control this community and have something kind of as an oasis out in the middle of this horrendous battleground of zombies and human beings. And then you can start seeing, though, early on that there's more to this guy. He's not a nice guy. He knows how to use his rhetoric. He deems the people on the outside that are threatening him, of course, he caused the threat in the first place by attacking them, as a terrorist. And there seems to be a lot of borrowing, at least in my opinion. It seems to be a lot of borrowing of rhetoric that we hear nowadays from the American government and politicians. But he bases, this idea of we got to be fearful of these other people. And then he controls the media. So therefore, everyone listens to him when he says, well, they're out to kill you. They're all going to do this. And I have to protect you. And we have to be merciless towards these people in this other community. That the other community, of course, is the one run by Rick Grimes. But the thing is that he controls the narrative and he leads these people who are good people to their destruction because they've been lied to. And one of the characters that I thought really represents, kind of a liberal, idealistic mindset is the character of Andrea, the blonde gal in starts out season 1, 2, and into 3. And it's kind of ironic, her past profession is supposed to have been a civil rights lawyer. So I thought it was kind of fitting that she seems to have this kind of, when she runs into this governor, she's taken in too, thinking, hey, he's pretty cool, and, builds a relationship with him. All the while, she's not kind of noticing, at least not very fast, that he's not all that he seems to be. He's leading her just like he's leading the rest of the people. And this has such a profound political statement that here's someone very well educated that has even been out and seen the horrors out there in the real world. And she falls under this guy's spell and is unwilling until the end. And I won't go into too much detail in case you've never seen the show. Unwilling until the end to come to terms with the reality that should just be hitting her in the face. And the governor guy, when there was an event that took place involving his zombie daughter, he didn't want to part with her. And then he goes, like, instead of just being just a narcissist, he kind of goes full-scale psychopath. And so, it sets up a very interesting scenario. Oh, by the way, the whole bread and circuses thing I thought was interesting in how they dealt with that. Maybe, how they had replaced sports. It wasn't boxing or anything, but he had a game in which you would, he'd tie up zombies and have them, have some warriors out there who would take them out in an arena, exposing themselves to some danger but still, this was good old fashioned fun for them. And again, another analogy to using not just your control over the message, but also, sports, but also the whole control over food, protection, all of this. It did represent a little microcosm of maybe what American society is today, run by some psychopaths and controlling the narrative and most people just kind of like going along with it. So anyway, beyond that, again, I promised this, the evolution of the character, Rick Grimes. He starts out being very nice, but by the time you get to season 5, you've had to survive so many ordeals, and many times problems have existed because you weren't willing to do really horrendous things that violated your ethics. So at some point, by season 5, there's especially this scene where he's having to chase down a cop. He's a cop too, but he's chasing down this other guy who's a cop, and it kind of illustrates that there's a little bit of psychopathy that's built up in him, or maybe if you go by that definition, I don't personally, but some people use that definition that, psychopaths are born, sociopaths are created by their environments. I don't agree with that, but still, rather sociopathic behavior in that one scene. But the thing is that would we have to have a situation like that? And that's what the article is asking too. What kind of societies would we have forming after such a breakdown? And does this give us insight into how our societies are today and actually how vulnerable they are to anything that would threaten them? I mean, are we really, are Americans, for instance, or Northwestern Europeans in particular, so gullible that when someone gets on and assures them that I'm here to protect you and those people on the outside, those terrorists, those this and this and this, we will make sure they don't cause you any trouble. And as long as you give up your rights and surrender your sovereignty to us, we'll make sure that nothing happens to you. You see, that's kind of the situation you have. And again, we go into another society, the whole Alexandria society that we come up with in the end of season 5 and the beginning of season 6. A society that is encapsulated. There was a barrier had been set up that prevented a lot of these zombies from really giving them a hard time. Plus, they had built this giant wall to protect themselves. The wall, I think, is quite symbolic, but I'm not going to go into a lot of Jungian archetypes here. But they had a wall, and, were able to kind of preserve this nice, liberal, egalitarian, they had their solar power and stuff like that, community without having to worry too much about the outside world until, of course, these guys, the main characters, show up at their doorstep. Invited, actually, but they still the community's unprepared for what's going to happen and, what is out there in the real world. And I would equate those to like Europeans to a large degree, at least Northwestern Europeans, and maybe urban Americans, metrosexuals, the whole hipster type persons and metrosexuals and fashionistas and so forth. And what would happen in the event of a societal breakdown to those kinds of people, men and women both. And, it's not just an academic question, because just maybe 5 years ago, Syria was one of the safest countries to visit in the Middle East, with beautiful, beautiful cities, and law and order. But then it has collapsed. And now it's, you got ISIS and all this kind of stuff. And you really do have this kind of study in barbarity. I mean, the only thing you have to do, you go to a lot of different video sites. And if you're looking at stuff about the Syrian, the war in Syria, there's things that you do not see on the nightly news shows on the various networks. It's cruel. It's barbaric. It's insane, but it's a Hobbesian nightmare. And that Hobbesian nightmare could happen in any country if the infrastructure is torn apart. Okay. It doesn't just happen in Middle Eastern countries. It could happen anywhere if you remove the societal constraints. And the thing is, I think it's interesting how they present this idea that these people are easy prey. They have an idealistic view of life. They go out and try finding people to bring into their community and trying to, maintain what they had before this epidemic broke out. And in reality, but the thing is that ultimately, of course, like I said, it all gets shattered. And they're ill prepared to defend themselves. They're ill prepared to survive on the same terms as people that have been out there for several years fighting zombies and nasty people and that sort of thing. And ultimately, that is I think those would be the 2/3 of the people that Joseph Tainter was talking about that would die. These would be people who would, many of which, I've talked to people, what would happen if you had a total societal breakdown? And I found that really, really urban left-wing type people often will just say, oh, well, I'd probably just sit back and just die. I would just, just starve to death. And they just would, why? Have they been conditioned just to give up? Have they been conditioned to just think, oh, well, I'm not gonna go through it. I don't have what it would take to go out there and build a new society. And I wonder if sometimes these are the people also. And anyway, I got cut off there. I wonder if these are the kind of people that would actually support like gun control and that sort of thing, because ultimately they just want this nice, comfortable existence that would be provided by their leaders. And they don't want to really, they've kind of lost that idea of fighting for survival. And I don't mean fighting as in going out and, having street fights, but just that kind of audacity and survival behavior that you see presented on these kinds of shows. Now, the other thing I'd like to bring up about the political aspect of the series, again, is the idea of networking. Because I said earlier that, most people are not Daniel Boone's and Davy Crockett's and so forth. You do need some sort of networking. And it's illustrated in the show, in which people, they may not trust each other, and who would after a couple of years of, horrendous fighting and betrayal and stuff like that. But they still have to rely on connecting And that's what you would have to do in event of some sort of apocalypse. I personally think the areas that would survive best would probably be the Mormon areas of like Utah and Idaho and Wyoming and northern Arizona and so forth. I think those areas would survive quite easily because they have something that connects them. They have the whole idea of food storage. That's one thing. It's interesting. I'm wondering how much this series, The Walking Dead, has actually encouraged people to store food away. Maybe we should have a little bit on, extra. Because, most people, how long could you survive? Seriously, with what you've got in the refrigerator, what you got in your pantry, how long could you survive? And calculate that out. Now, of course, there are some, Christians who will say, well, I'm not worried because I've got Jesus. Well, so do people in Syria getting their heads cut off by ISIS. Okay? They're Christians. They're being killed. The only ones that are safe there are the ones that are being protected by Assad or the Kurds or, like in Lebanon, Hezbollah. That's who's protecting the Christians. Okay? And, you don't get, the Christians, you don't get any special, get out of danger free card. There's plenty of Christians that starved to death in the Soviet era when Stalin took the food away from various regions, especially in Ukraine. And so, is it really a Christian thing to not have stuff stored away and not being prepared in case of a disaster? Are you going to look at your children and say, sorry, we didn't store stuff because we're waiting for Jesus? Okay, I'm not putting down religion. I'm just saying the Bible doesn't teach that. Okay, the Bible does not teach that. In fact, you will find in the story of Joseph in Egypt the whole idea that Joseph told the Pharaoh that the Pharaoh was receiving inspiration that he should store 7 years of food away for a famine. Okay? That is, the Bible talks about prepping right there. And if your minister or pastor or whatever is just saying, we don't need to worry about those kinds of things, well, then we could ask him, does he have insurance on the church? Does he have insurance on his car? Does he have insurance on his home? Okay? If he does, then why not have insurance as in having medical supplies and food and stuff like that stored away? Okay? And, it could just be small things that can happen that can destroy the infrastructure. It doesn't have to be a zombie epidemic. It does not have to be some dinosaur killing asteroid, if that's correct, blowing up the earth. It does not have to be those kinds of things, but it could be disease. It could be a limited nuclear war somewhere in the world. Heck, there's a heck of a lot of wars, taking place right now. That's another point. I just want to bring up something I thought was really interesting. Read over one of those scriptures that says in the last days, that there would be rumors of war. And one thing I think is interesting is there's always been war, okay? There's probably never been a time when the whole world was at peace, okay? Well, maybe after the flood there was, I don't know, or before the flood. But the thing is that it's never been totally at peace. But I'm wondering, think about modern society. We have communication systems that we can look at wars going on anywhere in the world right now, okay? And we can look at regions that are having problems instantaneously. You're hearing rumors of war. Well, could this be could be a showing that we're just better connected? That we can look at where there's an earthquake. We can look where there's a war. We can look where there's famine and be aware of it, as opposed to 500 years ago where you didn't care about those kinds of things. They didn't affect you. You could live your whole life in some regions of Europe, for instance, where they don't have earthquakes. And, you read something in a Bible talking about an earthquake and you're like, what's an earthquake? Because you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have experienced it. So in that sense, it's like someone living in the Sahara Desert and someone would say, oh, the snowfall that's taking place. And they'd be like, what's snow? They wouldn't have a concept of it. Now we have the concept. Maybe this is some of the things pointing to these latter days. And again, I don't want to get so much making this a religious sermon, but still, it is important that maybe we take to heart, this kind of maybe Jungian collective unconsciousness, that connects us, and maybe the popularity of these kinds of shows could have something to do with our inner insecurities about a perception of something that could be, something that happens in the future. And, where you do have a collapse in the society, and you do have to rely on yourself, your family, and a small group of people who would be in your community to keep civilization together. Okay, so that's just something to consider. And that's about all that's all I'm going to deal with The Walking Dead. But, look up that article, that I told you about in National Review. It's quite interesting. And also, I think I'm going to write one article about this for my website at michaelcross.net, or those 2 videos you can check out, the interview with Joseph Tainter, or the one I did on the hidden meaning of zombie films. But anyway, I'd encourage people to check out my website, where I write about a lot of these same topics I deal with on the show, at michaelcross.net. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at PsychoMike777. Okay, what I would like to deal with tonight is how to basically not be vulnerable to one of the major ailments I think we have in modern society, and that is narcissism. I'm going to explain a little bit about why I think narcissism is on the rise in our culture. And I don't mean the full-fledged narcissism that, we debate about as a personality disorder. There may be more of a, some people that are more prone to it because of genetics, for instance. But I mean more of what you could call secondary narcissists. Just like a secondary psychopath is not really a psychopath, but has learned how to adapt to a psychopathic work environment or political environment. A secondary narcissist is someone who just gets caught up into the whole culture of narcissism. I guess you could, in a sense, say that we have a lot of society that is what you could call narcissistic wannabes. And whereas most people would never admit to it, in fact, one of the ways you can actually find out if someone's a true narcissist is just ask them, are you a narcissist? And they found in research that an actual narcissist will usually answer yes. They will admit it. They understand it. Whereas a narcissistic wannabe will go to great ends to pretend that they're not, or to illustrate that they're not. So anyway, I'm going to deal with why we have this epidemic in our society, and then how you can shield yourself from it. Because if you are living in this culture, it can become very burdensome to have to adapt to it. If you have a strong enough image of yourself and values and so forth, and you refuse to be caught up into this whole thing, you can feel kind of isolated and lonely and depressed because of it. Even if you're, just because you're an outsider, which this would make you somewhat of an outsider, doesn't mean you've got it all together. It can still bother you. So anyway, what causes this kind of thing to take place? Well, first of all, essentially what a narcissist is, and I'm going to be very, very brief on this, is a person with a high degree of self-worth coupled with a diminished view of the worth of others. So it's not like you're someone who feels like, I'm a great special person and so are these other people. Or it could even be not in the sense of, I'm a great person and so are these other people who are doing great things. A true narcissist actually would have a high degree of self-worth, even grandiose self-worth, but diminish all other people, even people who've achieved a great deal more than they have in life. Now, another major component of narcissism is a lack of empathy. Okay? The inability to really feel for other people. The inability to kind of walk in their shoes and to understand where they're coming from. That is another trademark of narcissism. And, these things can actually be something that's not only the true narcissist, but also the secondary narcissist. Now, I would say that I'm just going to start right out here. One of the big reasons for this narcissism in society today, I think, stems back to Edward Bernays. He wasn't the only one that kind of got the consumerist ethic going, but he was one of the major ones, if not the major one. He is the one that created our modern advertising as we know it. And the thing is that he quite correctly understood his uncle, Sigmund Freud's, research and conclusions that people are motivated by subconscious fears and desires. And some of those basically are the desire to fit in, the desire to be loved, the desire to have sex. Many people think that's all Freud's all about. It's not completely what Freud's all about. And, security. And so if these are people's desires, you can then sell them things based on making them feel inadequate in those areas. Now, the reason I bring Bernays up, even though this sounds contradictory, make people feel inadequate unless they fill up with the need, is that what happened after this kind of ethic really started growing is the media and the advertising started dealing more with you can be someone special if you buy these things. So first, they rip you apart. First, they present you as being insufficient, weak, vulnerable, lacking. Okay? This is really, there's a lot of feminists that quite rightly so point out that this is aimed a lot at women, but it's also, in fairness, aimed at men. And so the idea is to really emphasize what you don't have. And then give you a substitute to hand you over products, designer labeled jeans or handbags or a certain type of car or a certain occupation or a certain this or a certain that. And then when you have that, that will compensate for your weakness, at least according to the advertiser. And then what will happen is you will feel not just adequate, which back in Bernays' time, it was more like, hey, compensate and feel better about yourself, but to actually feel superior to others that don't have it, that don't fit in the same way. So, in other words, this is a component of narcissism, and it's really driven by our media culture today. Now, I'm going to get back to media in just a moment, but we can also look at such things as the idea that we've gotten into an era, and this was especially true a few years ago. I remember in education, oh my gosh, in the late 80s, early 90s, everything was supposed to be teach kids that they are special just because they are special, and no longer connect that to accomplishment. And, they've integrated this kind of concept into physical education where, everybody's a winner. And then, even if one person does a 4-minute mile and the other one does a 40-minute mile, it's okay. They're all a winner, no matter how much they strived or didn't strive. And then on the top of that, you got into the idea that such things as awarding people for certain accomplishments academically was not the most important thing to do anymore. So, because there was an idea that it was unfair. The problem with that is then that everyone gets an inflated sense of themselves. In fact, it's even resulted in great inflation in in both public education as well as higher education. And so everyone's feeling like I am just the smartest person on the face of the earth, even though they really have not accomplished that much. And that's true, not just in education, but also in parenting. And so that has contributed to narcissism, I believe, in today's society. Another aspect that connects to the whole lack of empathy, perhaps, is that we are more isolated. We have children growing up instead of maybe, 50 years ago when the average person in America growing up had 2 to 3 siblings on average, and they had to learn how to integrate, cooperate, and to also understand each other because you were stuck with each other for all the time you were growing up. But now we have a situation where we have a lot of 1-child and 2-child families. And often the 2-child families are separated by a great deal of age. And so therefore, there is not that natural connection in a family situation, not that, what Alfred Adler talked about when it came to birth order, and also the aspect of basically learning how to fit into modern society by, learning while in the family, because that's where you're supposed to learn. So anyway, we are a more isolated people too, because, you take a look at playgrounds nowadays. And, you read these articles all the time about some mom lets her kid go play on the playground alone, even though she's within sight of the playground. And some nosy neighbor calls the cops and, suddenly she's got the Child Protective Services Division on her case, and that sort of thing. Well, and also we have all these fear-mongering in media where it's like, oh my gosh, someone's going to kidnap your kid and sacrifice him on the altar of Satan, at some sort of festival in the woods someplace, run by members of Congress. Okay, this kind of thing has really, really gone out there, and so people are afraid to let their kids go out. And so increasingly, when they do go out, they're supervised. And when they're supervised, this creates a false environment for them. Everyone has to be good. Everyone, you don't get those lessons on the playground that often do round out a kid's character. And we also, I think, are in a situation where, we've got not just what I said about the media, compensating, but we also have a media that increasingly, especially that's aimed at young children, that says that it's not going to school and studying that's important. It's how you look and what clothes you're wearing and what other things you're doing and what kind of smart aleck comments you can make to a teacher or to your fellow students. And the thing is, this creates a false persona, as Carl Jung would put it, a persona that starts getting a complex built around it because you start believing you are the persona that's been developed by the media. Okay? And it's not you, but you're living up to a false persona. Maybe you look a certain way. Maybe you have kind of a Barbie doll build and you're blonde, and so you live up to the persona that's presented in the media about how you're supposed to act. Or you look a little bit more on the nerdy side, and so you act like that. It's like purchasing a persona. And that's what we are doing when we sit in front of the TV and let it dictate what we should be like. Now, there's also the social media. Oh my gosh, look at that. We got all this kind of stuff about social media saying, you take the best pictures, you go to some glamour shot and get a picture taken and put it on the Facebook and so forth, and then you look at what everyone else is doing, and you're competing with them for the best pictures and who gets the most likes and so forth. I've seen even people in their 50s do this. Okay, oh my gosh, why didn't I get more likes on this picture I took, when I was on vacation? It's like, who cares? But this is developing a type of narcissism. Now, how do you discount it? I think first of all, what you need to do is you need to get into a mindset that first you have to recognize the motivation behind the media and recognize that it's ultimately not there to benefit you. It's there to sell you stuff. It's there to mold you into something that maybe you're not. And so I think that's the most important thing. In fact, I think if you got rid of media altogether, as in television viewing in America, you would have a severe decrease in narcissistic attitudes. I think the next thing is make sure that you recognize social media is fake. It is fake. People always are putting the things up that they want to impress each other. And most of the time it has nothing to do with accomplishment. It has to do with, some sort of look at me, like you can be 47 years old and like, look, I'm still an MTV star or something like that. Okay. That's another biggie. Social media, sometimes putting it down is a good idea. Maybe going out in the woods and connecting to nature. Maybe connecting to things that have more of a foundation, more of a purpose in life. Maybe spirituality. Although some of these televangelists, I think, are suffering from some narcissism personally. But connecting to spiritual bedrocks. Knowing your value. I think one of the greatest things is just to go out on a really clear night and just look up at the stars. Okay? Things like that. These help you to develop yourself as a person. Now, I don't think you can really build empathy in a person, but it is important not to let it be torn down. So you need to try to resist that. Resist these messages that are always aimed at you to just not care about others, to see other people as objects. Okay? That's a biggie of getting rid of. And finally, I don't really want to make it sound like that I'm promoting the whole self-esteem movement, because I'm not. But look at yourself for the worth that you are as an individual. Okay? And also strive to accomplish things. Improve yourself. You're not special because of just sitting there in the chair and you're just so special. You're special because you go out and actually develop those, God-given qualities that you have, whether that's physical, spiritual, mental, helping others, intellectual. These are, there's always room to improve no matter what your age. And that will reduce the narcissism. Accomplishment does not get narcissism, unless it's a narcissist. But it actually makes you value the process of getting to a certain goal. And that's what's important, ultimately. So I think if you do these kinds of things, you can survive and thrive in a society that is caught up in so much narcissism. It reminds me more and more of the in the Hunger Games, Capital City, this ultimate narcissistic playground of, people and everything. And once you get to that point, I think you can actually adapt and actually find a lot more happiness and self-fulfillment even in this narcissistic society we call the United States and Europe today. Anyway, just wanted to get that off my chest here. And, it looks like we're out of time. So I would encourage people to tune in next week to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care.
Visit pigminenews.com and to subscribe, youtube.com/pigmine7.